Okay, it's 8 o'clock by my clock, which is the one we use, so we'll get started. Just introduction, remember to adjust the chair. Turn off your cell phones, please. Unless you want to, my thing is if your cell phone rings, you got to put the speaker on so we can hear the conversation, which might not be the most pleasant experience for you. So with that, Cindy, would you please, and Mark, so everyone knows, Mark Knotts will not be with us today due to family things. And Cindy, who is the staff supervisor on the House side, is going to staff the committee. And she's looking forward to it, I can tell.
I certainly
And
am.
if you haven't met Cindy Farwell, actually also, and I'll embarrass her, is an award-winning author.
Oh, thank you very much.
So a great book for kids, and that, and if you're interested in what it is and that, talk to Cindy directly.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So with that, Cindy, would you take roll, please?
Representative Banks,
Here.
Representative Conrad,
Here.
Representative Heiner.
Here.
Representative Knapp.
Here.
Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Lawley.
Here.
Representative Tarver.
Here.
Vice Chairman Western. Vice Chairman
He was
Western.
here. Okay, he's temporarily excused. He's somewhere.
Okay,
I saw
thank
him
you.
here.
Okay. And Chairman Burkhart.
Here,
Thank
we
you
have a
so
quorum.
much.
Thank you, Cindy.
Yes.
So with that, first bill up for our consideration is House Bill 239, Vehicle Idling Decriminalization. Representative Singh, come on up and present your bill.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Proceed.
I have a little handout going out right now. But before you, I have House Bill 239, and I ask for your favorable consideration. My opinion, it's a good little bill. It's a repealer. So as of right now, on the statute, it's currently illegal to leave a vehicle idling unattended on a public road. And based off of modern technologies, I feel like this is an obsolete piece of statute. And so that's what this bill does. It strikes that. The penalties right now for violating this could be a $200 fine and a misdemeanor. This is practical for everybody, anybody that wants to warm up their vehicle, as well as delivery drivers, diesel drivers. So being able to exercise autonomy over your personal property in that way. This was put in place in 1955 with Senate File 125, the Uniform Act regulating traffic on highways. And so this statute was written before the technology even existed to accommodate what they were thinking. I'm sure it was well intentioned. They just didn't know we'd be able to do things like this in the future. And so I ask for your favorable consideration in this bill. Thank you.
Okay. Question, Representative Conrad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Representative Singh, thank you very much. As a criminal, idling my vehicle, I just want to ask you a question. When was the last time someone has been cited, for lack of a better word, specifically, and where was that at?
Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Conrad. So there's only been one citation where this was used, and this occurred last year in 2022. And there were several things going on simultaneously, which led to this being cited, as well as, so the vehicle was unattended, the engine was running, the brakes weren't properly in use, and it ended up sliding and colliding with another vehicle. But that's the only time it's ever been used.
Okay, other questions? So, Representative, why was this put in place in 1955? Do you know?
I'm speculating. but I believe it was to have just a unit, so the Uniform Act regulating traffic and highways was just to get things on the book with the introduction of the interstate highway system. So prior to that, things weren't uniform throughout the entire country. So I believe this was just done to accommodate for a federal program.
Okay. Representative, is that federal program, is it still in place? Could someone, in effect, be cited by a federal law enforcement officer for a violation of the federal portion? It may be the same.
I'm not sure, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure if that is currently in place on a federal level.
Okay. So nobody else is asking questions, Representative. I guess I'm stuck doing it. So if you look at the rest of that paragraph and you go over on page 2, it says effectively setting the brake thereon and when standing upon any grade, turning the front wheels to the curb or side of the highway. Why did you leave that in place?
This was, Mr. Chairman, this was brought to me by a member of my community who was specifically concerned about the idling portion of this. And so when I created the title with LSO, I kind of did that with that in mind.
Okay. And Representative, this would not affect someone leaving their vehicle idling in their own driveway, correct?
No, this applies only to public roadways.
Because actually, I've got an email from someone who said, please don't pass this bill because my neighbor leaves his 2 diesel semis idling every morning and it keeps me up. So I was just curious. I think that's the other side of someone actually getting cited for this. So, okay. Committee? Okay, nothing else? Okay, with that, we'll open public comment. Any other legislators wish to speak? You can just stay there. Any other legislators wish to speak? Anyone from the governor's office? Mr. Perkins, do you wish to speak on this bill? Okay. All right. With that, anyone want to speak on this? Any public testimony? One last time. Okay, I'll close public testimony. Committee? Moved by Larson, seconded by Banks. I guess with a 2-page bill, we could go through it line by line, but I don't think that's necessary. Any discussion on it? So committee, the good representative is correct based on his catch title. You could not delete that second portion because it's our one subject rule. So. Question being called. Cindy, would you please call roll, please? We're voting on House Bill 239, vehicle idling decriminalization.
Representative Banks,
Aye.
Representative Conrad,
Aye.
Representative Heiner,
Aye.
Representative Knapp,
Aye.
Representative Larson,
Aye.
Representative Lawley,
Aye.
Representative Tarver,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Western, and Chairman Burkhart.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay,
9
so
ayes.
thank you, Cindy. House Bill 239, vehicle idling decriminalization, passes the Minerals Committee. And Representative, I assume you'll carry the bill on the floor.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good. Now the really easy bill. We have House Bill 286, ETS consolidation. And while Representative Nicholas is a sponsor on this, he's not here to present the bill, which is acceptable. As he may have explained to some of you, while we have a cutoff on bills, the chairman of appropriations can introduce a bill up to the very last minute, which is what this is. Is a consolidation of, and I will let Chief of Staff Perkins present the bill. But some background, about a dozen years ago, maybe less, ETS, Enterprise Technology Services, was moved out from under the Department of Administration and Information as a standalone agency because of all the issues, IT and cyber issues we have. And it was felt that might be a good move, make them their own agency with their own director. And that has never really worked out smoothly. So this would bring, this bill would bring ETS back under the Department of A&I. The director of A&I would in effect be the agency director over this. There would still be it would be a division, there'd be a division head to, again, consolidate state agencies, hopefully make it more efficient and achieve what the original intent with the ETS was. So with that, Mr. Chief of Staff, let you proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Drew Perkins, Governor Gordon's Chief of Staff. It's a pleasure to be in front of you today, and thank you for that introduction. Again, this is the Senator Nicholas has agreed to run this at the request or to assist the governor in this reorganization. As you stated, Mr. Chairman, if I can just give you some background of why we think this is important. I think you've already gone through that. This organization, actually, the first Chief Information Officer was in 2002 that was created. Then there was a council and some other things were created. The original ETS, or the IT services for the state, and I know that I see that there's a lot of new faces. And when we talk about enterprise, we're talking about the entire state government. And so there's only two agencies that are inward facing and that deal with across the enterprise. All other agencies are facing outward. They deal with the public. They deal with the communities outside of the state. Two agencies face inward. Those two agencies are ETS and A&I, and they provide services across the spectrum to most all, if not all other state government agencies. And so these two divisions, or these two agencies, are a bit unique. And several years ago, under the prior governor, ETS was broken out because there was a couple things were going on. They were trying to consolidate and pull IT services from around the state and pull them in and create a more uniform and more technical expertise in the agency to do that. And it used to be that there were IT people stationed and did these things, and you pick your agency. They were out there. And then there were agencies that didn't have their particular IT, they were very small and didn't necessarily have their IT. Then they were getting IT from Enterprise Technology Services back when it was a division of A&I. So when they broke ETS out of A&I and made it a standalone agency, they consolidated almost all IT people from all the state into ETS to provide those IT services. And there's some great things that happened in doing that. That centralization led to increased technical competency across for IT services available across state agencies. It created a uniformity in pricing or in purchasing power. Now the computer and the software you had were appropriate for what services were being performed by the user of that computer. When this whole thing started, there were many pirated or illegal licenses being used by the state. That was taken care of. So we came in compliance in that way. We had better uniformity in pricing and systems and also cost savings. One of the things that has suffered dramatically, and one of the reasons that this is brought to you, is because customer service to the former agencies has suffered. If you would go out and talk to almost any director of any agency who receives ETS services, they will tell you that it's between 2 days and 2 weeks for them to have a service call answered, to have their IT problem fixed. Sometimes that's faster, sometimes that's not. But in talking about that, there seems to be a loss of this customer service element that we need so that our agencies can function. All of us are very well aware of how IT services are so vital and so important to what we do and how we do it these days. We've had 4 separate directors of ETS since its inception, and quite frankly, we are pretty much 0 for 4 on those directors being successful in that mission of ETS. All of them have had some good things. All of them have done various things, but none of them have quite worked out and helped ETS realize the vision that was intended for it when it was created. And so with that, with the resignation of Director Vida a couple weeks ago, the governor thought it was time that we take this and we come back and look at this and take another look and see if we can design it literally from the ground up and start over and see so that the next director, when they come in, we're handing over to them something that we think that works for Wyoming, works for Wyoming's government and the employees and the citizens of the state of Wyoming as we do this. So with that, this is basically a reset. This takes it and puts it back under ANI, which is the other outward-facing agency. If you will go out and look at what ANI has done, they have done tremendous. ANI is not a perfect agency, but ANI has done tremendous things. If you go out and look at the car pool, the motor pool, it's as easy for a state employee to rent a car from ANI to do the state's business as it is for you to get on your app and go to rent one from Avis or Hertz. If you go and look at the grounds, you look at the grounds in the Capitol and look around how well it's kept, even with a shortage of staff. The things get repaired, lawn gets mowed, water. Sometimes they put too much fertilizer on, the grass dies, but who hasn't done that in their yard? So they brought that up. But if you look around, the reason these buildings look so good and they're taken care of so well is because of the folks at ANI. They also look at the employee group insurance program, which is the employee insurance for all state employees. That's run as a division of ANI. So ANI has a tremendous amount of success at providing customer service inward facing to state employees and the state and the state agencies themselves. Another great example of what they've done recently was the consolidation of HR services inside ANI, where used to have every agency pretty much had their own HR people. Some agencies then also got HR services from A&I, and those HR services have been consolidated. It hasn't been perfect, but overall it works very well, and our directors are happy with it. And there's potentially a model there that we can use as we reinvent ETS. But again, this is a bottom up. The governor has met with all the employees of ETS and told them what they're doing. He answered questions for over an hour the other day and meeting with all ETS employees about this after Director Vida resigned. And so this is a designation. This is a first step. This isn't the end. This is the first step to reorganize ETS into the agency that we all want it and need it to be. In doing that, Mr. Chairman, I think there's another bill out there. I think it's House Bill 84, which does with ETS. It has to do with enhancing cybersecurity. This bill will not affect that. So this bill doesn't have an effect one way or another on House Bill 184. So with this, we're going to continue to move toward in cybersecurity. We're going to continue to push the modernization of IT services across the state. We're going to have a great emphasis on creating customer service back to the customer agencies. It will also increase the effectiveness and efficiency of the operation of government. And so with that, that brings us to the bill. Mr. Chairman, this bill looks very long, but this bill is very easy to understand, believe it or not. And if I can tell you, probably the easiest way to do this, if you go to the second to the last page on 34 and start with the repealers. So if you look at Section 4, and you'll see that in Section 4, in this case, is where the repealers are in this bill. You'll see that repealed are 29-2019. That is a statute that simply says the Department of ETS or Enterprise Technology Services is hereby created. Very short chapter. That goes away because this is no longer an agency. This is going to be a department under ANI. So that's what that one does. Then if you go and look at 29-2901 through 92-2907, they're repealed because, again, what those are is talking about the duties and functions of the CIO and the agency of enterprise or ETS or Enterprise Technology Services. So it strikes those because those are all set up and provide the functions for this agency. What this bill does is simply then go back and restates those exact, for the most part, I'll go through the exceptions in a minute. It simply restates those, not in the exact order, but I've gone through very carefully and compared those, and it just simply restates all the functions and duties of the Chief Information Officer and the Enterprise Technology Services, and restates those in this bill, because now it will be, if this bill were to pass, will be a division of the ANI, the agency of ANI. I didn't know it thundered. You could hear the thunder down here anyway. So that's what this bill,
Snowplow.
go ahead.
Snowplow, any number of things up there.
Anything, okay.
We've got 3 feet of concrete, so.
Here we are in an undisclosed location. Is that right, Mr. Chairman? So that's what this bill does, and that's why it's not particularly complicated, because it's just a restatement of existing statute. So of just going through section 1 then kind of is really just the purposes and ideas behind this. What you're doing is it places that Enterprise Technology Agency, that it becomes within, if you go to the top of page 2, within the Department of Administration and Information. It's created by this act. All the appropriations, all the people, everything are just going to swap over. There's no changes. We're not changing locations. We're not moving buildings. We're not adding more positions. We're not taking positions away. We're just simply moving this agency back under ANI. So that's what we do at the top of page 1. Then at the bottom of, you get to the second half, we're under subsection B on page 2. Not with understanding any other provisions of law. What we're doing is then just reappropriating the money that's already been appropriated for ETS is now appropriated to ANI to be used for the services of ETS. So that's all that does. If you go to page 3 on C, again, this now is where there's a little bit of difference. This is how the director of ANI is appointed. Right now, that person is appointed by the governor with subject to the advice and consent of the Senate, as are most directors in state in that. So again, what we have here, because we don't have a state chief information officer with the resignation of the last one, this simply provides that the governor can appoint a temporary state chief information officer to serve as the administrator of this particular division. And then he'll submit, when he gets and wants to appoint a full-time one, he'll submit that to the Senate just like he would all of the directors. So that's what that does. Mr. Chairman, this is one place that you might consider an amendment, or this is the vice chairman when he's gone. Representative Heiner, this is a place you might consider an amendment at the end of line 12 on page 3. We might just add that the state, something along the lines that the state chief information officer may only be terminated with the consent of the governor. The purpose of that is to create some ability of independence with this person, even though they would report to, and the supervisor would be the director of ANI. We wanted to make sure that, again, there are certain direct reporting responsibilities to the governor. And so that creates an opportunity for the state information officer to be secure in that appointment, that it remains a gubernatorial appointment. And so, and of course, that would be subject to the advice and consent of the Senate as well. As provided above. Then you get down to D, and then any reference, this is kind of a catch-all, just in case we miss something in the rest of the statute when we make this. When we refer to ETS, it's going to be a division of ANI as opposed to a separate agency. And so that's just a catch-all though. So then you get to section 2, and that is then just where we begin the restatements. So the rest of this is just a restatement. It's not in the exact order, but they're just restatements of the repealed provisions that were as an agency, so that now we have new provisions that make it a division of ANI. It's the exact same definitions that you have through those number of pages. You get the definitions take you all the way to page 6. Then you start down, this gets you into other sections, and these are various restatements of just going through and talking about the purposes and the functions of ETS, and it goes through, and these are just literally restatements of those, of the ones that were in there before that are being repealed when it was an agency, and do the exact same thing. I'm not exactly sure why when LSO drafted it, that the orders were changed a little bit, but if anybody wants to go through it sometime, I can give you those, I can give you some of those references so you can match those up. So other than that, that takes you all the way through page, it takes you all the way through page 20 of the bill. And so then you get to section 3. So section 1 is just that restatement that we talked about of the repealed provisions in the in those sections that were repealed under section 4. Section 3 then are just conforming amendments. If you look at those, all that does is go back and try to identify every place else in the statute where it was referred to the Department of Enterprise Technology. Well, now when it refers to the department, it'll be A&I. And then what you find most often is the Department of Administration and Information Enterprise Technology Services Division. And so it just simply goes back, and anywhere where it calls it an agency, it refers to it as a division or a division of A&I. That takes you all the way through the bill to page 4, which was page 34. Page 34 where we started, which is then we get to the repealers. Then you see in 5, that we're going to work with the Joint Appropriations, report to the Joint Appropriations as we go through this, because there may be some additional statutory changes that might need to be made as we work through this over the interim and make that report to them. But we'll be working with them throughout the interim on making this and keeping them informed of as this organization continues. And then section 6 is effective date. So that's the explanation of the bill, Mr. Chairman, and I'm happy to ask for any questions or go into any deeper detail if anyone has questions or you would like further discussion.
Thank you, Chief of Staff Perkins. So any questions for Chief of Staff? Representative Knapp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to understand the position of Chief Information Officer. I'm assuming that you're keeping that title because it's probably the only title that exists in the compensation department, but does the level of responsibility change? Is it still considered a director level position requiring Senate approval?
Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Heiner, yes.
No,
this.
Knapp.
Pardon me?
Representative.
Excuse me, Representative Knapp. Representative Knapp, yes. Again, if we go to page 3 on C, the CIO will still be the director of this division or will be the administrator of this division. Typically, you have an agency, and in agencies that are large enough, they have divisions, and oftentimes the division heads are referred to as administrators, but the CIO is specifically will be the administrator or the boss of this division within A&I. And so I don't think that so we still have a chief information officer for obvious reasons, cybersecurity. We have large systems going in. They help provide technical expertise and oversight. All these, a good chunk of what this bill is the restatement of what the responsibilities of that CIO are with respect to carrying out the mission of ETS with regard to the state. And it's everything from computer systems, they take care of telecommunications, the unified network. They work with the University of Wyoming. They work with the Highway Department. They work with the university and the community colleges. They do all those things. And so the CIO is still responsible for all of those responsibilities. And that's what most of this statute and this restatement of those are.
Okay. Representative Western and then Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Perkins, and I guess this maybe might reveal my ignorance, but on page 12, lines 8 through 12, talks about, I guess in subsection, it says the division may, through infrastructure network under the statewide education technology plan, provide telecommunication providers services too. Right in the Roman I, it just talks about private schools, if the division determines capacity is sufficiently available, et cetera. I guess this question reveals my ignorance, but what's kind of the thought behind that, and why is that in there?
Well,
Mr. Perkins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Representative Western, the private school, again, that is existing statutory language. That's been a responsibility and is a current responsibility of ETS. And so all this does is, again, just move that same responsibility back under this now division, if it were to pass the division of A&I. But the issue is that if you look at that, private schools, if the division determines the network capacity is insufficiently available and private schools accessing the network, there's a reimbursement. If you go back in the Wyoming Unified Network, the state of Wyoming laid out a number of years ago, fiber, optic fiber out and created a hub that goes around the state. and then it went off into communities. And that was done mostly for educational purposes. It provided what's oftentimes called the unified network and created high-speed data access for schools across the state. One of the things that happened in that was you had to be really careful because you didn't want to compete with the internet and providers as we went through that. It didn't want to compete with private businesses, but nevertheless, you needed to have, particularly with testing, a lot of the testing that's done in schools now is done online, and you had to have the bandwidth to be able to get that done. And so recognizing the responsibility to educate schools who have the same, those private schools have the same standards as public schools. If the broadband width that they needed wasn't commercially available for them to have that, then the state could step in and they could tap into the state's unified network like other schools. That was the purpose. That continues to be the purpose behind that. Now we see broadband going everywhere. We'll see what happens between what's happened with broadband in the last few years and what's going to happen through IDGA, the infrastructure bill. Broadband is being laid everywhere. And so this may become more relevant, may become less relevant, Mr. Chairman. I don't know how it'll work.
Okay, Representative Lawley, you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Perkins, I just want a clarification on page 3 in the suggested amendment concerning the state chief information officer may only be discharged with approval of the governor, I think was roughly your language. And you made a statement after that about advice and consent of the Senate. And I believe, I just want to clarify, you were referring to any sort of reappointment of a new person to take that place, correct?
That's correct. That's
Mr.
correct.
Perkins.
Yeah. Oh, excuse me, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I apologize for that misstep. Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, that's exactly right. I probably did misspeak when I referred to that. The appointment is subject to the advice and consent of the Senate. Terminations are not subject to the advice and consent of the Senate, just the
Yeah,
replacements.
thank you.
Okay, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just had a question regarding the meeting the governor had with the staff within the current ETS. Were there any concerns expressed, and if so, were those concerns resolved, or how did that meeting end up working out?
Mr. Perkins.
Mr. Chairman, the answer, I think the meeting went as well as it could have gone, Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson. I think that my experience in both business and in government is the only thing people hate more than the way things are is change. And so it creates a lot of uncertainty. Unfortunately, it's one of those things that happen once in a while. You're so focused on what's going on and it's dropping the last minute. The name is consolidation. And so consolidation in the current age of downsizing creates a lot of fears in people. But the concerns were mostly what was going to change. Were they going to be stuck back in the agencies? Were they not going to be able to wear their polo shirts that say ETS on them? Were there, did they think there would administrative positions be lost? What would happen? It's just what's going to happen to us. And so the governor, like I say, took all questions. We had probably 100 or so in the auditorium that's just over here. Plus we had the rest were spread out through the state or couldn't otherwise attend. Most of those were appearing online, and many of the questions came online. And so they were answered every question that came up. So I think there's a lot of concern. We'll see how it goes because it affects their jobs. People are always very concerned about what happens with their jobs. But the commitment of the governor is that this will be a bottom up. They're going to be consulted. There's going to be listening sessions. There's already an ability for them to provide input in ETS already. They can do that either in person or they have a form and a system that through their administrative systems. Now they communicate where those things can be brought to the attention of management. So it was the commitment of the governor to do this as a design up. So they're waiting to see, and I think there was concern that this would be going under A&I and what that would mean for them, and there was concerns about that. But they were assured by both the director of A&I and the governor that right now it's pretty much a status quo. That they really won't see much different in their day-to-day lives right now while we figure this out. But a couple of things that have happened. I know that Director or Interim Director Sheehan, who is the Deputy Director, and those of you who don't haven't met Tim, Tim is a great state employee. He's very, has a lot of credibility when he speaks with the JAC and others. But he has a kind of a 1-tier, 2-tier, 3-tier system where they would do it based on problems and issues. Well, there's some discussion about how that might be. There's a discussion and how it might be more kind of like HRD, where they still work for, it would still work for ETS and II, but they may be embedded in some of the agencies to provide more responsive service times and better relationships with state agencies. But all those things are on the table as we go through this reorganization to figure out how to do it and do it right.
Other questions? Representative Heiner.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Chief of Staff Perkins, appreciate you being here this morning. The purposes of consolidation are usually to improve efficiency or to reduce costs. And as I see this proposal, it's basically just taking the CIO and his entire department out from under the governor and putting it under the A&I director. So no changes proposed at all, other than just the line of authority. Do you see any possibility in the future to either improve efficiency or reduce costs through this consolidation?
Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that the purpose of this and the reason this is happening is, Mr. Chairman, is to increase efficiency, increase effectiveness of this agency. If we can't get that problem resolved, then what happens is you'll have continuing pressure from directors of agencies who are customers of ETS to now start either have their own IT people back in their agencies, or they're going to want to start having contracts with outside service vendors who will either may, or at least the perception will provide a better or more rapid service response. And so the first thing is to get this back where it needs to be so that we have the efficiency and delivery of services that we want. Those types of things. And as we move forward, one of the ways that we increase efficiency in government is through automation of processes and systems. And that requires oftentimes an initial investment in IT or IT systems. But what that does is when you do that, you have to make sure that you're not, when you do that, you have to make sure that you're not just taking a bad process and now doing it very quickly. You have to make sure when you do that, when you move in those directions, that your systems take better processes and more efficient processes, and then are able to do those quickly. And so the more that we can do, the more that we can drive the efficiency and effectiveness of this agency, then the more the opportunity we will see for cost reductions. And again, we have seen one of the things that this consolidation and into ETS, I mean, if you go back 12 years, even though there was an ETS and it was an A&I, it wasn't like it is today. Like I said, there were IT people spread out all across the system. There are still some IT people who are embedded in divisions, but they're with particular groups that have very, very large customized systems that face outward, that face the public. For example, the Department of Health has a few IT people that run their very large MMIS system and their WING system. They're just very, those were between the two of those, probably $150, $175 million in those systems to develop them. And they're very particular and very specific to that agency. And so there's a few IT people who are employees of the Department of Health that work only on that system, but they have obviously lots of other systems that interface. There's lots of arguments about the government's mostly on the Google system with Google Docs and things like that. And so there's always some frustration about whether it should have been Word or whether Google is better. But that aside, what we have is it's important that we maintain the uniformity of those systems so that when government agencies talk to each other, that we're not resulting in re-entering data or having to do different things, that we're talking on the same systems, that those are uniform and usable and appropriate for all of state government.
Well,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief of Staff Perkins, the CIO for being turned over 4 times in 4 years is pretty significant turnover rate. Is there something systemic there that we need to deal with, or is there some other underlying cause that would create such a turnover of a department head?
Chief Perkins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner. It's not been, and if I said four directors in 4 years, I misspoke. It's 4 directors since inception, which is about 10, 12 years now. So I think, and again, I think that's one of the reasons why coming back, Mr. Chairman, to this reorganization is so essential, is because what was really happening is you hired directors to create and run and develop ETS and what it looks like. So we've had 4 separate directors. We don't have this agency organized correctly yet. And so instead of hiring another person to come in and tell us how to do that, we do have a lot of good people who are very dedicated employees in ETS who have a lot of experience. This agency is now about 12 years old as an agency, so we're going to have a lot of experience about how we can redesign this and make it more efficient and more effective. And so our next CIO, we have the opportunity to turn him over what we think is a better designed and more appropriate and more efficient division and service, enterprise service, than rely on hiring one more person to come in and somehow fix that for us.
Okay, other questions? Other questions? Okay, so Chief Perkins, have a question just for the edification of the committee. If you would define for them what a type 1 transfer is.
A type 1 transfer is it's where you just take a lock, stock, and barrel and you move it over, so that the personnel, the positions, the function, the appropriations all move.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for Chief of Staff Perkins? Okay, no more? Then, okay, any legislator, if you'd just hang with us, any legislators in the room wish to speak on this? Okay, we've already heard from the governor's office. Any agencies? Okay, anyone in the room, any audience members, anybody want to speak? Come on up. Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jason Hendricks. I'm with Range. We're a telecommunications and broadband company in a number of parts of the state. We provide the transport services that are referenced in this bill to the state in a number of places. So just from a high level, there are transport connections primarily along interstates and main roads. And then to each school, there's what would be a last mile connection to each school, and that makes up the unified network. And so every few years, there are bids put out, and then we do competitive bidding, and we provide service to the state. And so we provide service on a number of those routes, plus connections to the last mile school. So that's why we're interested in the bill, because it mentions telecommunications a lot in the bill. So just want to make sure that as it's transferring from one department to another, everything comes over. And after listening to the testimony, I think that we're okay with that. So it shouldn't really affect how we operate. But there's one thing that I noticed that I didn't see got transferred over. And so I didn't get a chance to talk with Mr. Perkins. But maybe this is something you can follow up with, or maybe there's an amendment if what I'm looking at is correct. But there's a section, it's 92-2906 E5. That's the section that allows the state to get reimbursed from the Universal Service Administrative Company. So on the federal side, there's the Federal Universal Service Program. It has 3 main parts. It has a high cost provisioning to help networks get built. It has low income to help low income people afford service. And then there's an E-rate and a library section. Well, the E-rate library section is what provides reimbursement to the state to keep schools connected and libraries. And so that section, I did a search on the bill, it's a big bill, but I didn't see that section got transferred over. And if that's the case, then I think that's a pretty big oversight, because I think that provides quite a bit of reimbursement to the state. So I would look into that issue, and then, like I said, if I overlook something, that's fine. But if this is correct, then I think you might want to have an amendment on that part. And that's all I have, unless you have any questions for me.
Questions for Mr. Hendricks? Mr. Hendricks, could you give us that reference again, please?
Sure. 9-2-2906 E5.
And that's Romanet 5, I assume.
Correct.
Okay, small v and small e. Okay.
Yes.
For the committee, we have people who are looking that up. Does that, Mr. Hendricks, let me ask you then, that reference, because this is for ETS consolidation, does that come in under ETS? Is that an obligation of ETS? Do they control that? I'm just trying to make sure that we stay within title on this.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that is something that they do today. I can just read it. I mean, it's short. The department shall annually apply to the Universal Service Administrative Company under the Federal Communications Commission for amounts available to the state under the Schools and Libraries Program of the Universal Service Fund. All federal funds received by the state from the Schools and Libraries Program of the Universal Service Fund shall be deposited into the School Foundation Program account.
Okay, thank you. So why don't you just hang with us for a minute? Chief of Staff Perkins, could you come back up, please? Mr. Hendricks, you can just stay there if you wish. So,
Yes,
so
Mr. Chairman.
Chief of Staff Perkins, just curious, should that be included? Did we miss that? Because 9-2-2906 is Office of the State Chief Information Officer, Director, Authority, Duties of the Department. And that's kind of a pretty broad paragraph. And I think if we go back to the repealers, we repealed all of that, but did we put that section back in? I think is our question.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to look at that. If that was omitted, it was inadvertent, and it would have been, LSO would have just inadvertently admitted that. These are just, I've tried to track that through very carefully. Like I said, for some reason, when LSO drafted the bill, when you go to 9-2-2906, they didn't just lift it. For some reason, it started to move around, and sections were placed in this bill in a different order. I'm not exactly sure why, but that provision, if it's missing, should be included. And so I'm happy to look at that. I do also have, Mr. Chairman, that and I'll talk to you afterwards. There's a couple of other just kind of minor, or we could talk about them here. There's a couple of other minor changes in talking with the Department with YDOT, that they wanted a couple things that don't really change much. It just brings it to reflect what's actually happening with some of the services that they do, particularly like with Wild Wake and that.
Okay, Mr. Perkins, well, I think, yeah, just hang with us and we can do all of those as a standing committee amendment as we go through this. I would rather do it that way than start piecemealing second and third reading amendments. I'd rather have one large standing committee amendment that we've all considered. So, and I think, Mr. Hendricks, good catch. We'll look into that. Because I don't recall seeing that when I read through the bill mentioned in here at all. Now, it's a large bill that my not remembering it doesn't mean it's not here. I think we'll take your word that it was missing inadvertently, but because it appears that LSO has retyped all of this into the current format. They didn't just move it over and renumber anything like that. So, and with these bills, it's not unusual to miss a paragraph here or there. Okay, so I'm wondering, Mr. Hendricks, do you have a thought of where that should go in this bill?
Mr. Chairman, I didn't give that much thought, but I would think that if where the section is taken from, being this is Romanet 5, so wherever Romanet 1 through 4 and 6 are roughly in that same section, I would think.
Okay, I'm just taking a minute here to go back and look through this. Duties performed. Committee, help me out here. Do we have a section that talks about duties of what would now be the division director? I don't think so. So I'm thinking this would go under section 2 that starts on page 3. Probably, I'm thinking 9-2, 32-22. To C, and it would go at the end of that, which would make it C11. If that makes sense to the committee when we get to that point. I just want to resolve this issue now. Mr. Perkins, do you understand where I'm looking at on the bill? Do you think that's appropriate?
Could you say that one more time, Mr. Chairman? I was
Okay,
busy
it's actually on page 9. It would go probably at line 13.
Actually, I'm wondering if you go to Jack one page
Okay,
and look at page, there's a series in there where we're talking about, starting on page 7, we're talking about administering and approving long-range plan for telecommunications by agencies to coordinate telecommunications transport service network. Inventory of current telecommunications structure and agencies, the top of page 8. Subsection B, or subsection 5, review all existing and future agencies, telecommunications, plan networks and systems. I'm thinking that somewhere in that list, and I don't know that it makes any difference. I mean, you could put it, it would be easy enough to put it on 9 above D. So it'd be like 11. It might be fine at 11 right there, would be not a bad place to put it, I think.
okay. All right, and then renumber as necessary. Cindy, just bear with us. I will make sure you have all of this before we leave today.
Now, Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
It
please.
wouldn't require any numbering. If it was 11, it would be like right at line 13 on page 9.
That's
Yeah.
where I thought it would go. We just added in there then. Let me make a note. Mr. Hendricks, good catch. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
We'll have you review all of these for us in the future, maybe. He may have just found a new job. You don't look real excited. Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Mr. Hendricks. In this bill, it talks about providing service, broadband service to private schools and private healthcare. In your representation of your company, do you provide at this time any broadband services to private schools or private healthcare?
Mr. Hendricks?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, for private schools, I don't know necessarily. Yes, I'm sure we do. I can't say 100% though. We do a lot of services, I would expect, but I don't know for sure.
And Mr. Hendricks, follow up to that question is though, if you do, they are required to pay for that service, correct?
Mr. Chairman, that'd be correct.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Other questions? Anything else, Mr. Hendricks?
No,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience? Last time. Okay, closed public comment. Oh, I'm sorry.
Did you want,
Mr.
you
Perkins.
had a couple other amendments. You said if I had them, you want me to?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I apologize. So we'll go back to, I'll leave public comment open. You may say something that rouses a number of people in the room. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The director of YDOT gave me a couple of requested changes, and they're fairly simple. If the first one, Mr. Chairman, would be on page 9. Okay, and if you go to line 17, what you do is you would strike the language and the, where after transportation on line 17, strike the balance of line 17, and then the first word of line 18. So you would strike, and the colonel of the Wyoming Highway Patrol. As we're talking about this, we're talking about the maintenance and conduct the two-way land-based mobile-related facilities for public safety, radio, microwave systems. So we're talking about WildLink here. And that's not, the way that they do it, it's just under the Department of Transportation, which also then includes the colonel. But the colonel doesn't actually have a direct role in the administration of that. So it's a form over substance kind of amendment. And Mr. Chairman, and then the conforming amendment with that would be on line 22. You see after the first word department and patrol, you would strike and patrol.
Okay. All right. Others?
You know, the other one that was on page 11. If you go to line 4, so Romanet 4 there, you would strike the language of the state public safety communication. So strike all of line 4 except for, don't strike Romanet 6. And then on line 5, all the way through the statutory reference through 9 to 1101, you'd strike through that and replace it with the Wyoming Department of Transportation. So that would now, and then the second part of that would be on line 7. You would strike through the division and replace that and insert there for accessing the division's state unified network. So for accessing the division's apostrophe S, singular possessive, state unified network. So now that paragraph, or that Romanet 6 would read, the Wyoming Department of Transportation shall coordinate its statewide telecommunications transport service requirements for assessing the division's state unified network.
Okay. Right.
And that's it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. Oh, okay. I'll ask one last time. Any other public comment? Anybody in the audience find those suggested changes strange, unusual? Mr. Hendricks, see, I guessed right. Mr. Hendricks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Jason Hendricks again. The first one was fine. That last one, I think it's kind of concerning. It seems like it's a change in policy. Is this, and maybe I just need clarification, if that's the Department of Transportation that's now in charge of coordinating the unified network, that's a change in policy that I think takes a little bit more thinking about whether that's something we'd want the state to do.
Okay.
They control whether we get into highway rights of way. And so I don't know if with them controlling also the entire unified network, if that changes how we get into highway rights of way, or I don't know. I just haven't thought about that. That's the first I've heard it, and it seems like it's a change in policy rather than just a transfer over. So I guess it's a little bit more concerning, and maybe I need to be a little bit more educated on the rationale for it.
Okay. Mr. Perkins, am I correct in assuming that that is to address the WyoLink system?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, all this is talking about is this is the Wyoming Department of Transportation shall coordinate their statewide communications transport service requirements for assessing the division's unified network. So this is only talking about the Wyoming Department of Transportation is coordinating with ETS the link between WildLink and its communication systems and the Department of Transportation's access to the Wyoming Unified Network. So it's only coordinating the interface between the Department of Transportation when it needs to access the WildLink network, the Unified Network, which would be usually through some interface with WildLink. So I don't think we're not transferring the unified network. The intent is not to transfer the unified network, but just to make sure that the Department of Transportation, when they need to, through, for whatever reason, which is usually through WildLink, need to work through the unified network, that they can do so.
So, Mr. Perkins, and I'm not making this change, I'm just trying to make sure everyone understands. If we were to mentally read this as the Wyoming Department of Transportation shall coordinate its WyoLink system requirements with the division's unified network, that means kind of the same thing. Am I correct?
Mr. Chairman, I think that that's correct, but I think that there's also just direct radio sometimes interface with, there may be direct radio which may not go through WyoLink. So if you look, telecommunications transport service is a defined term in this whole section.
All right.
Back in the definition section. So the intent was simply to make sure that the Department of Transportation, when it does, this is a coordination between the department and ETS with respect to when the department needs to, the Transportation Department, YDOT needs to access the division. I don't think it's a change in policy. I think this, again, is what happens now. And this was Director Reiner's request to make sure that that happens. I don't think Director Reiner has any particular pride of authorship with how that works. He just wanted to make sure that what he currently has in his access and coordination through ETS, when they do need to access through the Wyoming Unified Network, that they still can do that.
Yeah, thank you. So committee, YDOT does have both WyoLink and some other radio communications that they use. It's not all WyoLink, so just make that clear. Okay, any questions? Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I will make this final, then I'll close public comment. Committee? Moved by Larson, seconded by Lawley. Any discussion before we start going through the bill? Okay, I can see you're really anxious about this. I know that second reading amendments on the budget are weighing heavily on your mind, but we need to consider the bills we have before us. So I will go through this fairly quickly. I think you know what suggested amendments there are. So page 1, page 2 and 3. Representative Larson.
On page 3, line 12, I believe the language we wanted to add was the, after the period, just say the chief information officer may only be terminated by the governor. So that I would like to make a motion to add that language.
Okay, seconded by Representative Knapp. Okay, the wording I had, Representative, was may only be terminated with the consent of the governor. Is that an acceptable adjustment? Okay. May only be. I'm making notes. Okay, Cindy, do you have that? Okay. And Cindy, I will make sure any of these that we make that you're completely clear on the wording and everything else. Okay, because I have both Representative Heiner and Representative Lawley keeping track also.
Okay.
It has come up where we leave here and a question comes up about the actual wording or the comments, so that's why I do that.
I appreciate that.
Okay, so any discussion on that amendment?
Question.
Okay, question being called. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Okay, that amendment is adopted. Okay, back to the bill, page 4 and 5, page 6 and 7, 7 and 8, Page, well, 8 and 9, sorry. I got out of order. Yes, Representative Lawley.
I'd like to make a motion that we amend page 9, line 13, and again, to really add back in section 9-2-209, small e, Romanet 5.
Okay, was that 209 or 2, was it
29.
2909 or 2906?
2906,
Okay.
922906.
Okay.
E, Romanet 5, back, just pull
Okay.
it back in.
Is there a second? Seconded by Larson, okay? Is everyone clear on that? I know some of us have the books out, and we would just take that wording that is currently in the green books in section 9-2-2906, small e, Romanet 5, small x. Okay, everyone clear on that? Okay. All right, okay. Question being called. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, no. Amendment is adopted. Hold on one moment, please. Cindy, you have that? And it would be all of the wording that is currently in statute in that section just pulled into here. Okay, I'm not gonna, I don't think you want us to sit here and read it to you while you write it down. Okay, all right. So Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also on page 9, line 17, after transportation, strike the remainder of the line. And on line 18, strike patrol, as well as on line 22, strike and patrol.
Okay. Seconded by Lolly. So Cindy, do you have that?
I do, thank you.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That amendment is adopted. Okay. Page 10 and 11.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Larson, you're enjoying this. Go ahead. I'm glad you're enjoying it.
On page 11, line 4, we want to strike the state public safety communications. On line 5, strike commission established under Wyoming statute 9-2-1101 and replace that with the Wyoming Department of Transportation. And then on line 7, strike through the division and replace that with for assessing the division's state unified network.
Okay, seconded by Lawley. Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Okay, and I would ask the committee, considering the discussion we had, if someone would review that and make sure that we don't need to run a committee of the whole or second or third reading amendment, make sure that wording is clear. But Cindy, you're clear on the wording we have here.
Yes, I have one question.
Yes.
Chairman Burkhart. Is it for assessing or for accessing?
I think it's for accessing.
Accessing, okay, thank you.
Okay, and all in favor? Did we already vote on that one? Yes, we did, okay. Okay, page 12 and 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and we're into conforming amendments now, so 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35. Any discussion on the bill committee? Any other discussion? Question being called. Roll call vote on House Bill number 286, ETS consolidation.
Representative, thank you. Representative Banks,
Aye.
Representative Conrad,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Heiner.
Aye.
And I do apologize to you for promoting Representative Western to your position.
Deserves it.
My apologies. Representative Knapp,
Aye.
Representative Larson,
Aye.
Representative Lawley,
Aye.
Representative Tarver, Representative Western, and Chairman Burkhart.
Aye.
9 ayes.
House Bill 286, ETS consolidation, has passed the Minerals Committee. So committee, obviously, Chief of Staff Perkins cannot present this on the floor. I really don't know if Representative Nicholas is going to present it or not. Do I have a volunteer to help him? Okay, boy, you're anxious today. You found something you really like, Representative Larson. Okay, give you a chance to sink your teeth into a major bill. Okay, if you need help, let us know. All of us will be glad to be right behind you at the podium. So, okay, thank you very much. So, and I would say you may want to spend some time with Chief of Staff Perkins on this for some of the philosophical comments and that. So, committee, thank you for this. A lot of good discussion on the bill. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 268, Wyoming Consumer Rental Purchase Agreement Act amendments. This is my bill, so Vice Chair Heiner will chair the committee while I present this bill with the help of, I think, some industry people. So, Vice Chair, give me just a moment to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will hear House Bill 268, Wyoming Consumer Rental Purchase Agreement Act amendments. Mr. Chair, would you please state your name for the record?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Minerals Committee Chairman Don Burkhart. And I have before you House Bill 268, Wyoming Consumer Rental Purchase Agreement Act amendments. So if I may proceed. Mr.
Please
Vice Chair.
proceed. Please proceed, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
Committee, I'm not going to read this bill to you, but I will tell you what it does quickly. The Wyoming Consumer Rental Purchase Agreement Act is already in place. These are amendments mainly to allow for digital processing of these agreements. From the time this bill was originally written, not the bill, I apologize, the statute was written, technology's changed. Most of the stuff we do now is digital, and it revises what we already have to allow for digital execution of contracts and that sort of thing. Also allows for an interesting change in industry, and I have industry here, and I'll let them talk in great detail about it. But they now have contracts with retailers. So you don't have to go into the store, a retailer signs on, and maybe they have a refrigerator someone really likes, and they go through a rental agreement purchase company on the internet, and they say, hey, I really like this refrigerator. They arrange for a local retailer to provide that. They in effect buy it from the retailer and then rent it with a purchase agreement to the customer. And that's kind of very simplified, but that didn't exist a few years ago. I mean, we can buy an automobile over the internet now. You can lease one over the internet. Some of the other things it does, it keeps in place our requirement that any retail operations have to have a business license for the whole retail for each location, except the digital ones have one for the whole state, because you can access the system from anywhere in the state, and that's a change. Originally had some specifics in there about the size of printing to alert customers to what they were signing. And that's kind of meaningless on the internet, so it requires that they identify it in another manner. Also allows some other things. For example, someone rents a refrigerator, has it for several months, decides, well, I'm going to buy it, but at the same time, I don't want it, and I'm going to donate it to a charity. Allows them the ability digitally, again, to do that. Removes the requirement that you have to hang a tag on the item indicating all of the agreement materials. So that's the bill in a nutshell. It modifies what we've already done in statute quite a while ago, and I can't remember when we did this. I vaguely remember in my time here of at least doing some modifications to that. So that's kind of in a nutshell. And with the vice chairman's permission, I'll have the industry join me and they can go into great detail on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Burkhart.
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Dave Pickard. I'm here today representing Rent-A-Center, and with me is Steve Arthur, also representing Rent-A-Center. I'd appreciate your time this morning, and I do know that the Secretary has handed out what would be considered a pretty substantive amendment. But I want to tee that up, and I'm going to let Steve give you a little bit of background on the industry. We have engaged a lot of conversation and dialogue with the Division of Banking, and they are here today, and they will, I assume join us here shortly. In that conversation, the intent is exactly like Chairman Burkhart, the sponsor of the legislation, laid out. It's really to modernize this act that has been adopted and operating in Wyoming for many, many years. And so we engaged the Division of Banking, and we've had quite a few negotiations. And I think we've got to a really good bill, certainly modernizing it with the amendments. And we can go through those at the appropriate time. But at this time, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Vice Chairman, I'd like to turn it over to Steve Arthur.
Thanks, Dave. There we go. Thanks, Dave. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, for allowing me to speak. Wanted to just give, as Dave mentioned, I'm here also on behalf of Rent-A-Center. The firm that I work for helps Rent-A-Center with their national public policy. And in fact, we helped Rent-A-Center work with state legislatures around the country between 30 and 15 years ago to help write a lot of the state's initial rental purchase agreements. So the internet basically didn't really exist, at least not for the rental purchase transaction at the time. And so now a lot of this is driven just by bringing this into the 21st century, as was mentioned by the chairman and Dave, to make sure that the online version that most people are becoming more and more comfortable with using for all sorts of transactions is reflected in your statute. With the vice chairman's indulgence, I want to just give a little bit of background on the rent-to-own industry, how it operates, and just so you're familiar with how the consumer interaction is and why we're looking for the changes that we are.
Please proceed.
So the rent-to-own transaction is a terminable lease transaction that provides consumers with the ability to gain consumer goods when they may not have a credit or any other availability to purchase that new product. There are many reasons that a consumer might choose an RTO transaction over purchasing of a good. Sometimes there's no long-term need for a good. I've had conversations with elected officials around the country that have said, hey, I use your Rent-A-Center's products when I'm staffing up my campaign office that may only be for 3 or 4 months. And it's much easier than trying to find used office equipment just for sort of that 3 or 4 months by really trying to do things. It can also be when somebody really doesn't like to watch a lot of sports, but they really enjoy the Super Bowl and maybe college basketball. So they could rent a nice large screen TV for just those couple of months and then give it back, and they don't have to pay for that TV that they may not use very much for the rest of the year. And that's sort of a fun example. Something that is a little more, that does happen as well. Say it's a single mother who doesn't have access to any credit. Either she has a credit card, but it's maxed out. Her refrigerator breaks down. She's got a couple of kids, one of them that might have infant formula. How does she keep the infant formula cold? How does she keep her food cold when she has no access to credit? Having the rent-to-own transaction allows her to be able to pay on just a weekly basis to eventually acquire ownership of that refrigerator when she might not have access to have to go in and try to buy it with credit since she didn't have access to any. And historically, our customers would come into our brick and mortar stores. They'd pick out something, as the chairman mentioned, everything in the store has a tag on it, talks about what the weekly or monthly payment would be, what the total cost to acquire full ownership of that item would be on that tag attached to the item. As we've moved to online, the requirement that there be a tag attached to that product doesn't make sense if somebody's just looking at the picture online. Those disclosure requirements can be below the picture, but it doesn't necessarily need to be attached. What I would think the intent of the statute is that everybody just be fully informed about what the cost weekly and full cost of that product would be to acquire. So as they're going online, that was what really prompted us to approach the banking commissioner to look to update the statute. In addition, as the chairman mentioned, more recently our company and others have started to have business relationships with those retailers where somebody can walk in to a Home Depot or a furniture store that is just selling the product, and if they are unable to take advantage of that store's credit, the store could introduce them to the rental purchase transaction. And that can be done a number of ways. It can be done either through the existing store's point of sale computer. It could be done with a tablet that might be, the tablet might be owned by that online rent-to-own company. And then the person just walks through and looks at all the disclosures on the tablet. It could actually be, in some cases, if there's enough business there could actually be somebody from the rent-to-own company that is actually staffing the store. That's probably a rare occurrence because the transaction doesn't happen, all the time, multiple times a day. But in certain cases, that may be an option. So we're looking at updating it to keep that flexibility, that the requirement that something is displayed, if it's displayed for rental purchase, it has to have that tag. Doesn't make sense that if Lowe's is selling, or turning a rental purchase transaction maybe once a week for a refrigerator, and then I'd be running through a couple hundred refrigerators a week to have all that information displayed in a tag. It makes more sense that if somebody's doing that transaction to make sure they're fully informed digitally, which is one of the purposes of the bill. The other thing that third-party transaction, it makes more convenient for that mother that might be looking for that refrigerator, is that rather than having to go to a rental purchase store, she can go to the more convenient store. And as the chairman explained, they go through the whole transaction, and as soon as they sign the contract, the rental purchase company would just purchase that item, whether it's an electronics item, an appliance, or furniture, and then the customer could walk out the door. We would have purchased it from Lowe's, for example, but the technical transaction would be between us and the consumer, and Lowe's wouldn't really have anything to do with that consumer. And that's why we tried to make sure that the requirements that we are perfectly willing to follow on that disclosure, that doesn't put a burden on them for that 1 in 200 transactions, or maybe even 1 in 500 transactions that might require some of those disclosures, that we think that making sure that they're fully disclosed electronically is an appropriate way to do it. I think that's probably a good background of how the process works. I think the key thing is the flexibility that, somebody can rent an item for just a couple of weeks or a month. There's no long-term commitment. If somebody wants that television, or they need a computer, and that actually is another example that we saw increases when a lot of kids were homeschooling during COVID, maybe not so long here in Wyoming as were in other states, but parents needed an extra computer that they might not have had because all of their kids had to be online doing virtual learning all the time, and may not have been able to buy 2 more computers for their 4 kids when they might have had 2 computers for them to share. And this allowed them a way to have that virtual learning for all 4 of their kids. I will stop there for a minute. I think did you want to walk through the bill? I can give a little more background on the reasons and what we're doing.
Yes, Mr. Arthur, I'd like to walk through the bill, but we also have 2 amendments, and I'd like to know which one we're going to, we have one in red and one that is not. And
Okay.
hold those for now? Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Vice Chairman, let me do a little quick explanation. The one that is in color was a lot of edits in the dialogue going back between the banking division and the client. I got that emailed to me first thing this morning. That's the one I printed off, delivered to the secretary to have delivered to you. Once Mr. Arthur arrived, we cleaned that up. All we did is take out the color coding. And so the one that is in black and white is the one that we'll be working off of. It's identical to the color one, but we just would prefer not to have the confusion of the crossouts on the color version and the color version itself.
Thank you, Mr.
I
Pickard.
apologize for any confusion.
I apologize as well.
Mr. Arthur, would you proceed with taking us through the bill?
Sure. So what I thought we'd do, with your approval, to walk through the bill, explain what the provisions are, and then we could address the amendments that we've discussed, if that works
Yes.
for you.
yes,
Okay.
please Proceed.
So the First Amendment, make sure I get my notes here. Page 2 was just, we wanted to define rental purchase property to make sure that it was, to help the distinction of when something starts to, when a piece of property starts to fall under the requirements of the disclosure. This was, again, to help the separation of that third-party retailer that might have those items, but they aren't really performing the transaction themselves. So this is to keep them from having the burden of having to tag with some of those disclosures that they don't need to when they're just selling the product. Then the lines 16, 17, and then is really, this is to just make sure that it's clear that a digital disclosure was allowed and appropriate, as opposed to having the disclosure have to be in writing and handed to them on a piece of paper, which is difficult when you're working online. The third one is, let's see, this is what the chairman had mentioned real briefly, is that in some cases, if a customer has rented a product for several months and they want to return it, maybe it's a chair or a couch or something, and it might be less expensive for the rent-to-own company to allow them just to donate the couch, because there may not be a lot of residual value to either to sell it or to re-rent it. And the current statute requires that it be picked back up. And in some cases, we'd be just as happy if they donated it to charity and just proved that it was donated. So it was disposed of in an appropriate manner. That gives us a little more flexibility. Then page 3, lines 6 through 8. This is, as the chairman also mentioned, font size doesn't really make any difference when you're looking at something on a phone, and putting something in a box that's in typeface that's larger than the surround, at least equal to or larger, seemed to be an appropriate way to highlight in something that, in a manner that's similar to something in 10-point bold. Just having it in a box sort of makes it stand out. Again, then line 19, that's again just making sure that you can deliver something in a digital format. Page 4, line 5, again, it's having that box, just making sure that it's available. Getting down to the bottom of page 4, adding F this was just to make sure that an item that's offered for sale online is not required to have a physical tag that displays the things that need to be disclosed, that they can be disclosed digitally, either below the picture of an item or just somewhere in those disclosure items as the customer is running through all the disclosures before they are signing an agreement. And then G this is again, making sure that, which is why we defined wanted to have rental purchase property defined at the beginning. This is to sort of separate out those third-party providers, that rental purchase property only becomes rental purchase property when the consumer is actually thinking about it. And that's when those disclosures need to be performed, and not until then. So it doesn't become rental purchase property until it's being discussed as rental purchase property. And then page 6. This was something, this is just a single statewide license. This was something that we discussed with the banking commissioner. This sort of streamlines the process as we go to online, that rather than having each individual physical location have to have a license, that having a license that we're doing business in the state seemed an appropriate way to modernize and consolidate and make things a little more efficient for the administrator. Although for this original language did require separate licenses for each physical place, and we'll talk about our suggested amendment, which we had some discussions with the commissioner about that, and we are in agreement that just a single license, even for all physical locations, is probably the most appropriate way to streamline the licensing process. Down to line 17, this makes sure that if we had suggested that the license only needed to be displayed where there's customers that are actually there, that there didn't seem to be much of a reason to display a license at a warehouse or certainly in an online setting to physically display the license. And then page 7 on G, this was, let's see, yep. This was to provide, in discussing the industry and the practices, the banking commissioner had discussed some of the concerns that the existing statute didn't really give them the appropriate authority to really go after bad actors, that they needed to wait for a complaint that needed to, before they could investigate. And this was really just to give them a little more authority to make sure that consumers were well protected, and we were comfortable with this. Although a lot of this we have, we'll be discussing this in the amendment, so I don't want to spend too much time going through the language here. And that is about it. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Arthur? The amendment looks extensive, so in lieu of time constraints that we have, maybe we ought to dive right into that, Mr. Arthur.
Mr. Vice Chair, I will come up and join you, but I want you to continue
Okay,
sharing, please.
that'll be great.
And I didn't know if it was appropriate to have the commissioner come up, since we've discussed this, or we can walk through our.
Mr. Bishop?
Just because most of this was sort of a back and forth, I don't want to be taking credit for all of it. And we can, as we go through, we can discuss where we might have some slight differences of opinion.
Just hold on a minute, gentlemen.
Okay, Mr. Bishop?
Yes, thank you. Jeremiah Bishop, Commissioner for the State of Wyoming. Also with me is Nick Rochadle, also a member of our office. Thank you for letting us join you on the amendments. They are extensive, and so, Mr. Vice Chair, I'd probably see what your preferences are. Like we discussed, we discussed these proposed amendments pretty extensively with Mr. Pickard and Mr. Arthur. However, we do have some slight changes, so I think it's under your, it's your decision, but I would recommend that maybe we go through these amendments. We'll let Mr. Arthur go through the amendments, and if we have any disagreements or changes, we'll go through it on the document that they provided.
Mr. Bishop, would you like to discuss the bill as it is before the amendments? Any comments or testimony you would like to provide?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Yes, this is it's an older statute that hasn't been changed in a while. I think overall, the primary thing that we're trying to do with this bill is definitely clean it up to modern times. One of the things we want to do with this bill is make sure that there is a single statewide license. I think the way the bill states right now is there's kind of a dual license structure depending on physical locations. Some of our amendments that we'll go through in a little bit is having just a single license structure. That is much easier for us to administer, and it makes a lot more sense for our staff and also for the industry to make sure they understand what license is required. And then the other section is really expanding on our examination authority so that we don't have to wait on a complaint to perform examinations. And I think that's some of the amendments that you have in front of you to the bill is just cleaning up that language. We took that language from elsewhere, and we'll go through that when we get to it. But I think with that, we'll just kind of go through these amendments. And Mr. Arthur, I'll let you go through them. And then if I have any proposed changes to his amendment or additions, we'll say so at that time, if that works for you all.
Mr. Bishop, we've got a lot of information here for changes, a lot of amendments. It's going to be very confusing for us. I'm just wondering if we've got time constraints and we've got some important business to take care in the chamber today. I wonder if we need to have a substitute bill rather than go through all of these changes, because not only here, but when we get on the chamber floor, if there's a huge amendments like that, it's going to be very difficult to entertain discussion on the floor and keep everyone from getting confused. So, I'd open it up to comments, but I just wonder it'd be better if we come back with a clean bill.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair. Yes, I agree. There's a lot of amendments to this, and that's one of the things we discussed. It might be easier to have maybe a substitute bill going forward. I'd leave it up to you with whether or not you want to go through the proposed changes now or get that written and do that at a later time.
So, Mr. Vice Chair, with your permission, I'll just resume chairing the committee.
Please
Okay.
do, Mr. Chairman.
So we'll go through the amendments, but we're going to have this as a substitute bill, and I'll just be blunt about it. This many amendments, this extensive, at this point in this bill, does not make me happy. I just want that to be known, because I don't like substitute bills. They confuse people on the floor because you have to attach the original to them. It's almost like one giant amendment. But we'll proceed. If you go through it, we do need to be on the floor at 10. It's budget time, and our time is very valuable. So I'll let you go through those, even though this is my bill. Like I said, I having this many amendments at the last minute, frankly, does not make me happy. So proceed.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Definitely appreciate that, and apologies for the excessive amendments. And with that, Mr. Arthur, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, and I will extend my apologies as well. Tried to work through to make sure that we were all on the same page, and it took a little bit longer than we had anticipated, and there were a few more changes that we thought we had addressed, and I think conceptually we had addressed most of their concerns. It was just in getting it in the drafting language. There were just some concerns that were raised in the way that we had suggested the language to you, Mr. Chairman. So apologize for that.
So if I might interrupt, Mr. Arthur. So Commissioner Bishop, I'm going to ask one question right up front. Do all of the proposed amendments stay within the single topic of this bill of Wyoming Consumer Rental Purchase Agreement Act amendments?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, they do.
Okay, all right. Yeah. So go ahead and proceed, whoever wants to.
Sure, I'll go ahead and start.
And we have about 15 minutes.
Okay. I'll go through some of this pretty quickly. The first amendment was simply to delete the word personal from personal property in line 7. Personal property is defined as personal property earlier in.
Mr. Arthur, and I'm going to interrupt you.
I'm sorry.
We are working from
You should be
this
working
amendment.
from
Am I
this amendment,
correct?
yes, that's correct.
So the one that has red on it,
Throw
we
those
can
away.
throw it away.
It's
Thank
the-
you.
It's the exact same wording. It's just
Okay, committee, don't get confused.
yeah, throw away the
one
red
with-
stuff.
Throw it away.
The black, all black, and that, again, that was my apologies when I sent the document to Dave this morning. It hadn't been cleaned up completely, and I just apologize. I can't do anything. So just deleting the word personal, because property is defined as personal property elsewhere. The second amendment, page 2, line 9, was inserting a inserting a definition for place of business. And this was just to make sure that later when we talk about the licensing, that the place of business is there. And then we added a definition for the independent third-party retailer, which makes it clear that that's the retailer, that there is some sort of relationship that the rent-to-own company is working with, because it makes it simpler, again, later. Page 2, line 10 is just renumbering. Page 5, lines 5 through 10. This was cleaning up the language that.
Question, Mr. Vice Chairman. Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Arthur, going back to page 4, the line 23 on page 4, I'm not sure if this is a wordsmithing or an error. It says online that a consumer can rental purchase. Is it rent or purchase, or can rental purchase? Is that a noun or a verb? Or I'm a little confused with that statement.
Yeah, this was something we can change that to make sure that we're referring to entering a rental purchase agreement.
Okay.
When we.
Yeah, so
we'll-
maybe you need to add a little more clarity to that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Before we even proceed, because this is going to be a substitute bill, we can handle this right here.
Okay.
So, and because we're considering all these amendments, so the proposed wording on line 23, page 4, would be that a consumer can enter into a rental purchase agreement. Is that the wording that you would want?
Actually, because we refer to rental purchase agreement on the beginning of page 4, why don't we say, or, that a consumer can contract to.
Well, Mr. Arthur, why don't we move on? Like I said, time is of the essence here. And you have about, you and the commission have probably maybe 2 hours to propose some wording to me by email, and I can get it to staff. Cindy, does that work for you?
Great.
Okay, because like I said, this will be a substitute bill.
Yes, thank you.
Continue, please.
So let's see, we're at page 5, line 10, lines 5 through 10. This was to provide that there was a little more flexibility for use the clear and conspicuous language rather than just simply a digital format. We suggested that which shall include, but without limitation, outlining such disclosure in a noticeable box. I think the commissioner has some comments on this particular amendment.
Just thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very quickly on page 5, line 210 on the proposed amendments. The general language that we use elsewhere is just the clear and conspicuous language. In parentheses, I think that's what Mr. Arthur added. Generally, our preference is to not have that, but we could clarify that in rule if needed, but we'll leave that up to a discussion.
Just our preference is we like clarity in statute rather than leaving it to rule, so we prefer something that we can follow. Then, let's see, deleting the 6 through 10 was just fixing the language to include that. Lines 12 through 22, this was just to clarify that G was talking about the rental. The intent of section G was just to clarify that property that's sold by a retailer doesn't fall under the rental purchase disclosure statutes until it's turned over to a rental purchase agreement. We just thought that this language was tighter and fit a little bit better, that made it more clear that it's not until it becomes becomes the rental purchase item that they deal directly with the RTO merchant. Page 6, line 3. This is, let's see. Yeah, this is where we just say that the single license is required. And then we amended E to, gives a little more process and goes through what kind of licenses there are. There's a license for the online, license for the physical, and then a separate license fee for the relationship with the retailers, the third-party retailers. Thought that was appropriate. Also makes clear that if somebody has a physical presence in the state, that especially if the commissioner was thoughtful about sort of a small independent retailer that might just have one store but offers online, that they shouldn't be required to pay two separate fees, one for online and one for that physical store, that if they're in the state physically, they shouldn't have to pay that separate fee. And then on the third-party retailers, there is discretion that the commissioner would be able to set fees on a per store basis. If somebody has a relationship with maybe just 4 retailers, that, it might be a $25 or $50 fee per store. Or some of us that might have relationships with stores throughout the state could just say, rather than itemizing each store, we'll just pay that maximum fee. So we'll have flexibility to have relationships with the third-party retailers that we want.
I'm going to jump in.
Okay.
Director, or Commissioner, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Vice Chairman. The first handout that we provided was the proposed fee language for 4019-114E. Apologies, we didn't have time to really reconcile our proposed definition. So this is our proposed definition in this statute. I think it accomplishes the same thing as the handout that you have in black. I think it's a little cleaner and it's a little clearer to just understand on our part. And I think we agree that
Yeah, and
the definition we have provided, I think, is agreeable.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
We're agreeing to substitute.
Commissioner, which one of these are we talking about now?
thank you, Mr. Chairman. We provide you 3 different
Correct.
pages. The one is 4019-114E at the top.
Okay, thank you.
That is our proposed language to basically insert that instead of what is on the handout.
Correct. Cindy, are you generally following this?
Generally.
Okay.
Chairman Burkhart, when I
Yes.
submit this to the lawyers, they will
I will
go,
proofread it.
okay, they will go through that in order to incorporate it all.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. Proceed.
And this, on page 6, lines 5 through 11, this was just to delete the requirement that each place of business be listed separately, the single statewide, the part of the single statewide license. 13 and 14, simply to insert primary before address. Each license shall state the primary address and then delete it of the office. So it will now read, each license shall state the address, the primary address from which the business is to be conducted. And then 16 through 18, we wanted to, this is to ensure that only each physical place of business of the licensee that is open to consumers, and that just no reason to put a license where consumers aren't there in a warehouse or whatever. Then on to 6.
On 16, sorry.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner?
In the language we provide you in the actual substitute bill, our proposal would be to have some type of requirement to list evidence of a license on the website of the company or the merchant's website. That is something that is very consistent among all financial institutions, that if they are licensed with us, they need to provide evidence of that license. But we'll provide that final language in the follow-up that we send to you.
Okay.
And this is one place,
Proceed.
there's one place where we can't agree to what he suggested. Just as a general rule, when individual states start to require things to be placed on websites, it can become very complicated for businesses to keep their websites. I think there's probably possibilities depending on where it needs to be placed, but if it needs to be prominently placed, that becomes an extra burden if it needs to be, pops up when you first go to a company's website. So we'd prefer that it be placed in the physical locations or some more flexibility in how it's disclosed online. Maybe just in the disclosure document itself as opposed to on the website. So then page 6, line 20 for H. This is just only if the primary address changes, does the license have to be updated during the year? Then J, the language that is here, this is just, it follows the similar language for the fees. And he's also, the commissioner has provided you with substitute language for 114J, and we are okay to substitute this language in our amendment.
And Mr. Chairman, one of the other things we included in our handout that you have is changing the expiration of the renewal from July 1st to December 31st. This is for ease of our office. Every single license we have that requires an annual renewal renews December 31st. And so our licensing staff actually has time set apart each year to deal with renewals. And so this will make it consistent with other licenses of that type. I think effectively it doesn't have a significant change. It just says, okay, this bill still goes into effect July 1st. If you want to receive this new license July 1st, it will have to be renewed as of December 31st, and then every year from then on.
Okay, so gentlemen, looking at the time, and we do need to get to the floor, I want the committee members to have adequate time to look at budget amendments, which I believe last time I heard there were 66 of them. I will take these, I will have a substitute bill crafted, and I hope they can get it done, because I know that staff is under a lot of pressure right now with budget amendments, and we will come back to this on Friday. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Okay, committee, with that, I will get with Cindy. I need enough time to work this with her, and we need to, I need to do the paperwork on the other bill. And that's, so we are adjourned. Thank you.